Brazilians woke up to a new president on Friday. Michel Temer says he wants to unite the country. But is he more controversial than his predecessor, who was suspended by the Senate? And is her impeachment a democratic move or a coup? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fauziah Ibrahim. The twists and turns of Brazil's political drama have been compared to the TV series House of Cards. Deeply unpopular leader Dilma Rousseff has been suspended, and taking her place as interim president is a man perhaps even more polarizing than her. Michel Temer is seen as serving the interests of Brazil's business elite, and despite calling for unity, he's appointed a cabinet made up entirely of white men. Lots for us to discuss today, but first, Daniel Schweimler helps set things up from the capital, Brasilia.
So the dust has settled a little here in Brasilia the day after high drama with Dilma Rousseff removed from power, at least temporarily, and the ascension of Michel Temer, the vice president, to government, to the presidency. He is a man who's been involved in politics, in high-level politics in Brazil for some time, very much a man in the background, a mover and a shaker, a man who's always been there, but people don't know that much about him. He's the oldest president at 75 ever to take the office of the presidency, albeit temporarily. He's a lawyer from the state of Sao Paulo, and people in the last few days have been asking questions about him, whether he is capable of handling such a high-powered job, especially in a time of great crisis. Meanwhile, Dilma Rousseff continues to say that this was a coup against her, a constitutional coup, that she was elected by something like 54 million Brazilians. She questions the legitimacy of this government, saying they are not an elected government, and she will be planning how to fight back. She says she wants to come back. She is, during the impeachment, the 6-month impeachment hearing against her, she will be organising that and stating her case. Michel Temer, meanwhile, has to try and convince the Brazilian people in the short time he has that he is the man for such a difficult task.
Now, in his first national address as interim president, Michel Temer called on Brazilians to trust their new government.
My first word to the Brazilian people is the word faith. Faith in the character of our people, the vitality of our democracy, faith in the recovery of our national economy, the potential of our country, in its social and political institutions, and in the capacity that united we can face the challenges in this time of great difficulty.
Well, Temer has promised unity, but he's already facing criticism over the choice of his cabinet, which is the first democratic government in Brazil not to include any women. And the entire cabinet is white in a country where more than half the population identifies itself as black or mixed race. Several of the newly appointed ministers are implicated in corruption at the state-run oil company Petrobras. Temer himself is being investigated in that particular scandal. He's also been found guilty of violating campaign finance laws, which could stop him from running for office for 8 years, all of which has led to more than 60% of Brazilians saying that they disapprove of Temer. Well, let's now bring in our guests for this Inside Story. Joining us in Rio de Janeiro is Rodrigo Nunes, political analyst and a lecturer at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. In New Orleans, Shannon Sims, a journalist who focuses on Brazilian politics and the Olympics. In Sao Paulo, on Skype, Claudio Couto, political scientist and associate professor at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. Welcome to you all. Mr. Couto, if I could start with you, and I want to take the words of Dilma Rousseff herself, who has said that Brazil is living in strange times and in times of a coup, a farce and betrayal. Now, perhaps it wasn't a violent coup. In your opinion, was it a constitutional coup?
Well, I think that perhaps the truth is somewhere in the middle ground of the idea of a coup or a totally constitutional process. Why this? I think, first of all, because of the whole story that we have in this case. In the day after of Dilma Rousseff's re-election, the opposition parties, and mainly the more important opposition party, the PSDB, the most important opposition party, was arguing that her re-election was not legitimate. They asked for a recount of the votes based on the gossips, on rumors from the social networks like the Facebook, for example, that there were some problems with some polls, some problems in some places where people were getting votes. Well, I think that there was a non-acceptance of the results of the elections in the day after of the elections themselves. And because of that, after this very bad beginning, we have a process of an impeachment that was looking for a reason, for a motive for that, and not exactly the opposite that should be expected in such a situation. There is a problem, a cause that justifies an impeachment. This inverted impeachment, I think, is what makes this situation so bad.
Right. Rodrigo Nunes, do you agree that this impeachment process is an excuse to get rid of Dilma Rousseff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously the use of the word coup is quite controversial for the associations with the military regime, but whichever way you slice it, this was not normal. And as has been said, there was the will to bring her down, and therefore the will to find excuses to do so. And obviously there was the opportunity to do that because she became highly unpopular for having done a U-turn on what her program was during the elections. And there you go, that's where the political class found the opportunity to do that. So effectively, what we've had was something akin to a no confidence vote, except Brazil is a presidentialist system, so we don't have a no confidence vote. Therefore, there was even though the impeachment process respected the procedure, it was based on the whole process was done in a way that's not constitutional. This is not what the Constitution says an impeachment is for.
Shannon Sims, Rousseff's supporters say that she was facing a perfect storm in the case of an economic downturn, having her ministers linked to corruption scandals and herself lacking in charisma, and that's why she had a PR problem in terms of trying to overcome all the problems that she was facing during her time in office. Is she the victim of events that were beyond her control?
I think there's a good case to be made that that's the truth. I mean, she's not in control of global commodities prices, for example. The Brazilian economy was set up to have a collapse. There's a good argument to make about that. And so in a way, she was the person left holding the bag. At the same time, she's not without fault. There's no way that you can say that her policies did not drive the economy further into the ground. I would say that almost all Brazilians, especially those who have lost their jobs, those who aren't able to open small businesses that they'd hoped to open during the boom years, almost all of them would not be able to be satisfied with her. I mean, her approval rating dropped precipitously over the past 3 years in a way that's almost unprecedented, from the 70s to the 10s. So that this popular rising up, it was predicted for a long time.
How could that even happen, Mr. Couto, seeing as she came in 2011 riding on a wave of popularity? She represented the Workers' Party. She represented the people on the ground. They loved her. What happened?
Well, I think that will have a combination of several aspects. First of all, perhaps this is the most important thing, Dilma Rousseff is not exactly what we could call a professional politician. She's not a politician at all. She's much more a hybrid of a militant on one hand and a bureaucrat, and a backstage bureaucrat on the other hand. Politicians are people who are able to compromise, to establish compromise not only in terms of the targets that they prosecute, but also in terms of the agreements that they have to do with the Congress, with other politicians, with the political party. and he's not able to do that at all. And it happens because on one hand, the militant side, she's so certain about all the things that she believes that it's very difficult to her to withdraw some of these beliefs. It's very difficult to her, for example, to negotiate some of the targets. And when she decides, for example, to make a decision that makes sense, it's too late. And so it doesn't make sense anymore as it used to be before. And on the other hand, the bureaucrat side, she concentrates very important decisions on her own hands, even tiny decisions that should be delegated for her ideas. And so these ideas, they don't have autonomy, not only to make decisions, but also to negotiate with other parties and other politicians.
Now, apart from the political chaos that's happening in Brazil, let's take a look at what else is happening in the country. Now, all of this political upheaval couldn't come at a worse time for Brazil. The economy is going through its worst recession in decades, shrinking by 3.8% last year. Unemployment is now above 10%. That's the highest in years. Brazilians are also gearing up to host the Olympic Games in August, but there are still concerns about whether stadiums and transportation will be ready. And there are new fears that unless the Olympics are postponed, the Games could cause a full-blown public health disaster because of the Zika virus outbreak. Now, Mr. Couto, Vice President Michel Temer has taken over amidst all of this political chaos and everything else that I've just listed as well. He will take over the next 6 months. This is the same man who is also in danger of facing impeachment for similar budgetary missteps as Rousseff. Is he the right leader for Brazil right now?
Well, it's difficult to say that. I don't think that Michel Temer would be elected as president in a normal situation. This is why some people like to compare him with the character of Frank Underwood, someone who conspired to get president but would never be elected president in a natural way. He's not a charismatic leader, but on the other hand, he's a very skillful politician in terms of negotiating with his own party, that is a very important party in the Congress, negotiating with other parties. This is why he was the Speaker of the House 3 times. This is why he's the president of the PMDB, the most important of the adhesion parties that provide support for every government, doesn't matter the program, for more than 10 years. And so, well, I believe that Michel Temer is able to keep a political support in the Congress, to provide some confidence to the market. But of course, he's not a person who inspires confidence to the whole population. And this is why the polls show that less than 10% of the population believes in him or supports him, actually.
Mr. Nunes, though, at the same time, Michel Temer has taken some steps to, shall we say, distance himself from the previous government. He's named the respected former central bank governor as his finance minister. He's created a new ministry to spur private investment. He's cutting down on bureaucracy by slashing the number of ministries from 32 to 23. Are these the right steps he's making?
Well, it's the steps he was put there to make. One of the reasons why there was such a push to bring President Rousseff down was precisely that here was a political opportunity to implement a program that was defeated in the ballots in the last 4 elections. And this is going to be an interim government. This is effectively an indirectly elected government, which means that between now and 2018, there's the perfect opportunity to do as many, both because of the political situation and because of the economic crisis, there's the perfect situation to implement as many of the policies that hark back to the straight-up, undiluted neoliberalism of the 90s as the parliamentary majority that this government almost certainly will allow.
Ms. Sims, he's installed a new cabinet that doesn't include any women at all, nor any Afro-Brazilians, despite the fact that 51% of Brazilians consider themselves Afro-Brazilian. What does this say about his aims for the next government?
I think that it's perplexing in a way that in 2016, Latin America's biggest country would create a cabinet that doesn't include not one of the 107 million women that are in Brazil. I think it was shocking in a way because Temer has a history of including women. And so it's strange to see his cabinet be so non-representative, both in race and gender, of the rest of the Brazilian population. In terms of what that signals for his program, I'm not sure that we know. I mean, at this point, Brazil is so under wraps with so many political games that are going on behind the scenes that it's hard to know what kind of deal making went on for those people to get those cabinet positions. Brazil is a hybrid parliamentary presidential system in a way, and so these coalitions, it's all about backroom deals. So that's how these guys got into these positions. Evidently, those were the best deals that he thought he needed to cut for the rest of his interim presidency.
Mr. Couto, I want to take up Shannon's point there about the political wrangling, the backdoor deal, shall we say. It's not just Rousseff that's on trial here, it's Brazil's democracy as well. At one point, this country was the shining example for all the Latin American countries. There was a smooth transition from the military dictatorship to democracy. What went wrong?
Well, I think that different things went wrong. First of all, we had a great reaction of the conservative sectors in Brazil against the policies that were implemented in the last 14 years by the Lula administration firstly, and after that by Dilma Rousseff's administration. I mean policies that are on one hand policies of social inclusion, both economically and in terms of social diversity, racial quotas, for example, gender-oriented policies, and the conservative sectors really reacted against that. And this reaction, it created, step by step, a climate of political and social intolerance in Brazil. We can see that for example, in some of the new blogs that appear on the internet of some publicists, even some of them from major vehicles of the press, that create more and more this climate of intolerance. For example, targeting all the members of the Workers' Party as they were thieves or they were criminals, making jokes about the social policies that consider that people should be included. And this social climate, together with the unacceptance by some of the opposition parties of their defeats in several elections, they create the appropriate the climate for that. And finally, what I already mentioned, the lack of real political leadership on the side of the PT, a more skillful political leader than Dilma Rousseff is. I think that would be able to manage this situation in a better way and avoid this problem that we have now.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the political elite. We've been talking about the leadership of Brazil. I want to bring it down to the ground, to the grassroots level. Now, Mr. Nunes, you've written about a crisis of representation. You spoke particularly in relation to what you call the silent majority, the ones who recognize the machinations of the political elite at their own expense. Do you see this silent majority breaking their silence at some point?
Well, that's one of the big questions now. One of the several ways, perhaps the way in which the situation truly could be described as a coup, is as a coup of the political system against society, against demands for accountability, for transparency, for better public services, etc., such as the ones that erupted in the 2013 protests, and to a certain extent were also captured by last year's pro-impeachment protests. So even some of the people who were out on the streets protesting against the government and demanding the impeachment of President Rousseff, even some of these people, according to the polls that were done at the protests, would say that they didn't trust any of the opposition parties, would say that they believe that all the entire political class were only out for themselves and represented only themselves, their own interests and the interests of their sponsors. And obviously one of the reasons why Mr. Temer was put there was is to reconstitute the political class in a moment in which it needs to shield itself from investigations, corruption investigations that involve absolutely all the political parties in Brazil. So PT has been made into a scapegoat. PT is the fall guy. President Rousseff is the fall woman in this process, and we're probably going to see a period in which there'll be a lot of deals taking place to prevent people from being investigated or being punished. And it will be interesting to see how even some of the people who are out in the streets protesting for the impeachment, how they might react to that.
Shannon Sims, Brazil's media has often been criticized for bringing about Rousseff's downfall, for painting her in a certain light or so. Does the average Brazilian recognize the fact that they are being, shall we say, manipulated for the interests of the political elite?
That's a really interesting question, and that's a question that you could write a million academic articles about. First of all, Brazil is gigantic. Brazil is very diverse. So there is definitely a young, leftist, educated class of artists, of architects, who all think that, for example, Global News, which is the largest media conglomerate in Brazil, they're certain that Global News is feeding them baloney most of the time, and in a very biased way is providing the news. However, in many places in Brazil, for example, they don't even have TV, they're getting radio. And many times they're illiterate in the very rural regions of Brazil. So that's a totally different climate. Those are people who are just receiving the news that they get, and it's hard for them to distinguish between what is true and what's not. And that is where the political games kind of take on a little bit of an evilness, in my opinion, because they prey on people who don't know any better, who don't know what exactly their options are. And that's really created a large distinction between an educated class of entrepreneurs, of venture capitalists, for example, in Sao Paulo and Rio, in the large capitals of the Southeast, versus those people living on the opposite side of the continent in the Amazon region, in the drought-stricken Northeast region. So you have a lot of different Brazils. It's hard to say what exactly people are receiving in terms of the news.
Mr. Couto, is it fair to say that after 13 years or so of a leftist government, the Brazilians have had enough, and now they're leaning towards the right?
Well, we have this movement here. One of the novelties of Brazilian politics is the reemergence of a political right in Brazil, a kind of new conservatives that appeared in the Brazilian scenery after we could say 40 years of political transformation in this country. For example, since the early 60s, just before the military coup, it was very uncommon to representatives of the conservative sectors of the Brazilian society to go to the streets and demonstrate. And we had since 2013, since June 2013, the appearance of these right-wing demonstrators on the streets. They are one side of this big reaction against inclusive and left-wing policies implemented in these last 13 years.
On that note, we're going to have to leave the discussion. Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. Thank you to Rodrigo Nunes, Shannon Sims, and Claudio Couto. And thank you too for watching. You can watch the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can always go to our Facebook page, and that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Fauziah, Ibrahim, and the whole team here on Inside Story, thanks for watching. Goodbye.